Hello and welcome back to another episode of the House of Hoosier podcast brought to you by the Field of 68 Podcast Network. We are recording this on the night of Monday, December the 2nd, as the calendar changes to the final month of the calendar year. Indiana is coming off of a rather embarrassing performance in the Bahamas, winning the consolation game but losing big to both Louisville and Gonzaga. We'll recap all of that from Feast Week and look ahead to see what's next as the Hoosiers have their first Big Ten games on the horizon. So. Welcome back again alongside Ian Plaskoff. I'm Austin Platt. Ian, how's your Thanksgiving, man?
It was great. Good to go home and take a little break, change of scenery, and I always love the Thanksgiving meal. It's one of my favorites throughout the year.
Me as well. Turkey tasted good. All the other sides tasted good, but the taste, I guess the sour taste that Indiana has in their mouths is something definitely to note here. And just it really started from the beginning. Indiana was just we'll get into all three games, but I lost interest really. I watched like 30 minutes of the Louisville game, and then I was like, all right, that's enough of that. Where I watched like 15 minutes of the Gonzaga game. I didn't watch a single minute of the Providence game. So you might have to be the real expert here on this show, but. I guess just to start, this was embarrassing. Straight up, I was embarrassed. Really, this was some of the most embarrassing I've seen at IU basketball in my now 4 years as a student here, and you've watched this team obviously for a lot longer than I have, but overall, just the way you lose to Louisville, and then you don't bounce back. You get Gonzaga, which nobody expected on the loser side. You play rather poorly against them, although there definitely were some more positives, but overall, losing by what was it, 28 points? You were down by 35 at one point to a team that just, obviously is so much different, but brought in so much from the portal, has not put everything together. It seems like quite yet had a bad loss to Tennessee early on in the year, as we mentioned with William McDermott in that preview show. But it was just embarrassing all around, and there are a lot of questions that I have about this team. I think just after these three games.
Yeah, Austin, I was right there with you. I stopped watching the Louisville game um, probably shortly after halftime. Gonzaga, I watched most of the first half and into the second half, but then we had an early Thanksgiving dinner, so I stopped watching that. And then Providence, I was on my way back to Bloomington, so I listened on the radio to our own Austin Render. So just starting out with Louisville, I mean, embarrassing is the way to put it. Now the final score reads 89-61, and those numbers don't look terrible per se, but that final score does not do this game justice. I mean, this was probably the worst game that I have ever seen Indiana play, at least from my recent memory. Um, I mean, these things that I found number wise, I mean, Indiana had more turnovers than made field goals, 23 to 21. They they had 22 offensive rebounds and still didn't take as many shots as Louisville did. So that is more on the turnovers there. Players other than Malik Renew and Umar Ballo shot 9 for 43 from the field, a 33, 35, 70 shooting splits, and only 12 assists for the whole game. I mean, that about sums it up as much as it needs to be summed up. And this game should have been lost by a lot more than what is that, 28? Yeah, it should have been probably closer to the high 30s, maybe even 40.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. It was a 7-0 run or something like that at the end, which I guess making it in the 20s is not as bad in the 30s. And I think this is the second worst loss differential wise, I think, under Woodson. I think that game against Nebraska last year, I think it might have been the tournament game or one of the games in the regular season was I think a point more, but regardless. Just really poor. I mean, these are the games that Indiana has lost under Mike Woodson, and it shows that this his style of basketball. I think we've seen his ceiling. I just I'm last year I was patient with Woodson. He didn't put together a great roster, but he coached them up just enough to get them to 10-10 in the Big Ten, which they skated by. They basically kind of threw all the if all the firing, whatever was the scuttlebutt aside, and they got the wins they needed to at least have a real reason to hold on to him for another year. But I'm just sick of it, man. I can't do it anymore with the two bigs. We're not playing in the 1970s. I mean, against a team like Louisville that shoots the ball, they shoot a ton of threes. You got to keep up with them offensively and defensively. Indiana just didn't do it, and I was really ticked off when watching this game. And I'm afraid we've seen. I think we saw what the floor was with a team like this that is defensively sound when it's at its best, and that's what we saw last year. This team was bad. They were really poor to watch. They were tough to watch at the end of the year, but they still went 10-10 in the Big Ten, and they got an offer to play in the NIT. And I think the year before that, we saw the ceiling. This team can be good. Trace Jackson Davis was great, and I think he's certainly has covered up for a lot of the way Woodson has coached, and I think he's covered up for Woodson's style just because of how good he was and how much he could carry Indiana to wins. And we're just not seeing that with this group. The shooters aren't necessarily there. Ballo just isn't the same. It's just not the same stereotype of a player that Trace was. And I'm just like I kind of given up, and at this point, I'm not giving up on the season, but I've just given up on the fact that this is a team that has potential to go to the third weekend, get to the Elite Eight, whatever. I'm out on that, and I just think under this style, if you're playing two bigs, we've seen the ceiling and we've seen the floor, and I don't think it's going to be anywhere too drastic between 2 years ago and last year the way this team shapes up.
Well, here's an interesting thought because I have a feeling that this team was designed to be good in the Big Ten and the Big Ten only, because the Big Ten plays a much different style of basketball than other Power Four conferences. I mean, these ACC teams, these SEC teams are built more like NBA style teams. They're much more athletic, they're much more fast, much more dynamic. And then you go to the Big Ten and it's all about the bigs, it's all about slow pace, physical defense. Um, and Indiana hasn't played a Big Ten game yet, so I still want to see what happens there. But this team is not, they're not going to play all Big Ten teams in March. So you got to build the roster better for that. I mean, it was all about getting these dynamic guards and athletic players in the offseason, and they just haven't been able to produce this year. And that's not to take any credit away from Louisville Gonzaga and the rest of the teams in that field because those are solid teams. But Indiana just did not look like they were on the same level.
Yeah, I mean, they were just clearly outmatched, and the statistics are just really eye-opening. I mean, the fact that IU had 22 offensive rebounds, and you still somehow don't get as many shots up. You mentioned the 9 for 43 for other than the bigs. I mean, the splits were bad, the free throws were bad, and Louisville, which is a good team, they shoot the ball well, and they're going to surprise people this year. Pat Kelsey's done a phenomenal job, but it's just not good enough. 1 of 11 for Miles Rice. I think he was like 0 for 8, 0 for 9. Galloway was quiet, was non-existent, and Carlisle was really non-existent in 13 minutes. I think he was dealing with an injury or something. He didn't play too much in the rest of the tournament. But it's just bad. The second half, the last 10 minutes was like, and once it got to 30, I'm like, I want this team to lose by 50. Like I want them to get so embarrassed that they really feel that they have disgraced the program. And we've gotten to this, look at all the non-conference games away from home. They've been pathetic. UConn last year, Auburn last year. I mean, Kansas the year before, and a matchup similar to this against teams that shoot the ball well. Indiana has gotten blown out. And at what point are we going to sit here and just allow this to continue? Something has to change. And I'm Mike Woodson has to change things up because you mentioned it in non-Big Ten games. This is what's going to happen every single time, and people should not be surprised at a result like this. They shouldn't be surprised at what happened against Gonzaga a day later. This is pathetic, and the fact that no one has changed it, even though you have Ibaka is good enough to play at the four, he's looked great, and he hasn't been on the floor enough, and just all of these things that have amounted to just and this is how the non-conference slate's going to be. We'll talk about the numbers, but the first net rankings came out. Indiana's 71st. This is what it's going to look like with these non-conference games that you're just not playing anyone close, and you're beating UNC Greensboro by 11 points. It's just not good enough. When are we going to change something? And now it's year 4, and the excuses are still ridiculous. And just these, it's year after year. Nothing has changed in my opinion. I guess it's just the easy way to phrase it.
No, I'm right there with you. The biggest thing for me now with new teams, there's going to be different issues, but it's the fact that we're seeing the same issues with different teams and different players on those teams year after year after year. I mean, Indiana basketball in recent years has been known for being a poor shooting team, not being a very exciting team on offense, being kind of old-fashioned in their way, in their play style, not modernizing to fit the rest of the brand of college basketball, not having enough playmakers on the floor, and relying too much on the bigs. And we see it every year, game after game, especially in these non-conference games against, again, non-Big Ten teams. The play style and the roster that Mike Woodson has is built for the Big Ten. But the Big Ten, yes, it's important, but it's not going to get you to the ultimate place where you want to be. I mean, we've heard all year long, Mike Woodson has said that the goal this year, and anything less than this would be a disappointment. The goal is to win the Big Ten, win a national championship at some point. With this roster and the way that they're playing right now, the I just don't see that happening. I mean, yes, we are 7 games into the schedule. There's plenty of basketball left, but you also look at the rest of the Big Ten, and it's starting to modernize as well. It's starting to become a better shooting league. It's starting to become more dynamic, play more on the perimeter, get some stretch bigs. And Indiana just has not met up to that standard yet.
I mean, yeah, if it wasn't for UConn completely like just blowing up in Maui, I mean, this would probably be one of the biggest stories. Is just the way, the lack of the way Indiana has played in these games. I guess we can move on to Gonzaga now that loss for Louisville by 28 points, 4 touchdowns is really crazy, and I think everyone's right. We bought out of the wrong Louisville game. We completely had the wrong game that we were supposed to get out of the schedule.
I do want to just point out a fact that I just realized here. Indiana football scored more against Purdue than Indiana basketball scored against Louisville. How about
That's
that?
I never would have thought of that a year ago. I can tell you that much. And it wasn't really that much better against Gonzaga if we flip the page. I think everyone kind of mentioned that the IU Gonzaga game would kind of who would be able to bounce back and who would want it more. And Indiana got lucky because they played. It was a noon game on Wednesday, and then it was I think a 2:30 game on Thursday on Thanksgiving Day. And Gonzaga was off of an overtime loss. They had significantly less rest than IU, and then it was just like, all right, who's gonna want it more? Like the heck with all the numbers. But like, how would Indiana respond? And they came out and they started well. They were competitive. They had a good spell to get it close, and then they completely, I mean, they completely got pulled away in the first half. And at halftime, it felt like the game was over. It was like a 5-10 minute stretch where just Gonzaga pulls away, and at that point, it's like it's the same deal all over again, where you're playing for just pride in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, the first half actually looked really impressive to me. I thought they had a nice bounce back performance. Umar Ballo looked great, and he was great throughout the whole game. I'm going to give him all the credit in the world for that game because he deserves it. 25 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, and a block on 11 for 13 shooting. So Ballo stood out. He was great. Everybody else shot 16 for 46 and 4 of 18 from three. And Indiana was playing well. They were shooting the ball well, moving the ball, playing solid defense early in that first half. And then I think it was what, like a 16-0 run near the end of the first half. It might have bridged the gap between the two halves, something like that. I was not really paying too much attention by that time. Um, but that was the difference in that game. Now, Indiana did better offensively, scoring what, 73 points. Um, but big thing here for me, 8 assists the whole game. That cannot happen because that means you're not knocking down open shots. It means you're playing a lot of ISO ball. It means you're doing a lot of dribbling. And against a Mark Few defense, that's not going to work. So 8 assists, the whole game. Now, somehow they put up 73 points on 8 assists. That's impressive in its own right, but that's a problem.
Yeah, and this game, it was fast. This game was frenetic. Like this looked like two teams that just threw out, kind of looked like just threw out, whatever they had prepared, whatever they did to prepare the night before, the morning of, or whatever it was, and just said, screw it, let's just go out there and try and just out hustle the other team. And that's where we see Indiana sometimes at its best, is just going up and down the floor. With the opponent, and there were a lot of fast break points, a lot of balls on the floor. It looked like there was a little more to it, but just at times the offense, it's just no one's moving around. There's no purpose to it. They try and get the ball inside, and then sometimes it's just stuck in the mud where it never comes back out. They get a bad shot up, or the defense creates a turnover, or maybe they find the open guy once, and they don't knock down an open shot. But 8 assists is really bad, and I get it. This Indiana team is not necessarily meant to pass the ball around. This is not a team that would do well against a zone defense in a sense, because they don't have um, the passing necessarily, or the outside shots, and especially if the opponent can do well inside, then defending well inside, and that's a problem. But there are just too many things that, I mean, 57 first half points. This is the defense that Mike Woodson always raves about. Oh, this is one of the best defenses in the past years in the Big Ten. This, that, the other thing. 57 first half points is pathetic. And sure, you scored 39, but at that point, it doesn't matter how many you give up. And I think IU got to the free throw line a good bit in this game. But it just, at that point, when you're down by that much, there were so many fouls in that first half that it was just crazy. And it felt like IU was just kind of playing to Gonzaga's speed. And it felt like Gonzaga really was in control for most of it. And it was just toying with IU at times. And just the two bigs, once again, as good as Ballo was, I'm glad he had a solid game. He looked good, I think, in all three games, which is a positive. But just it's not good enough. And Indiana, again, very much outcoached. And give credit to Few for getting his guys ready after that kind of that tough loss to swallow the day before, I guess, against West Virginia.
Yep. One quick stat correction. When I was putting together our little plan for this, the 8 assists was incorrect. It was 17, which is better, but 17 assists with 73 points isn't necessarily great. Um, but at any rate, yes, this was all Gonzaga. I mean, 89 points in a game, 50 whatever it was and a half. Defensively, Indiana's coverage, especially on the perimeter throughout this whole tournament, was just mixed up. I mean, the miscommunications on guarding shooters, the switches were off, the communication just wasn't there. And when you have a point guard like Ryan Nemhard, and it's just going to make it difficult to dice up that defense. Nemhard, 11 points, 13 assists in the game against Indiana. And Gonzaga's an experienced team. It's a Mark Few coach team. It's going to be good. And you got to be on your A game defensively. Indiana was not. And because of that, Gonzaga took advantage of that, played at their own pace, and just ran Indiana off the floor.
The offensive rebounds is the biggest thing that I will never understand with the guys and the personnel that Indiana usually has on the floor. And give credit. I watched Langdon Hatton, man. I was so happy for him. Like, he came off the bench and was fantastic. Like, if we want to pull some positives out of this crummy week, he was great. And however, what was it, like a 5, 6 minute spell? The crowd was on his feet. That was awesome to watch. Just the impact he had. Only 7 minutes, but got to the free throw line 7 times, 6 points for him. Like, that was awesome to see, and just the pace that Indiana was at. But just the allowing 13 offensive rebounds when you usually have two bigs on the floor, the whole nail slot rim thing just hasn't worked. I was watching, everyone's posting film now, and just the overhelping, the lack of communication, the doubling. If one guy, they both sell out for a pass and it leads to an open three, it just can't happen. And I don't think Indiana's offense. I thought it was going to be good at the beginning of the year. I think I'm a little bit mistaken. Sure, it's 2 games, neutral floor. We can make up whatever excuses we want because we've done that now. But just the defense has not been good enough, and you just cannot. I mean, you give up 60 points in the first half, you're not winning. I don't care what kind of offense this is. Sure, you outscore them in the second half, but I don't care. The game's already over at halftime. But give credit to Langdon Hatton. Let's give him his flowers. He's had a rough start to this year. He was great, and you know what? I was happy to see him succeed. Wish he got some more minutes, only 7 for him. But hey, if he can give those 7 minutes in 90% of the games he plays this year, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest with you. When I saw Langdon Hatton get up off the bench and go to the scorer's table, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if I like this. And then he came in, he spun over his right shoulder 3 or 4 times, got to the free throw line, and he showed some effort. Him and Luke Goody were guys that showed a lot of effort throughout the tournament, a lot of vocal leadership, especially Goody on that front. And that was something that a lot of the starters didn't really show too much. But like you said, if Hatton can give you that 7 minutes, allow Umar Barlow to get some rest on the bench when he's having a game like he did, that could be huge. Or even in foul trouble situations. Um, that's massive. And I'm just as happy for Langdon Hatton as you are. I thought it was great when he walked back to the bench with that standing ovation. I just thought that was awesome. Because he hasn't really had the chance to show too much of what he can do early in this year, but he made a significant impact on this game, and it was really good to see.
Be interesting to see how kind of he goes into the rotation. We saw Luke Goody, as you mentioned, he gathered 20 minutes in this game. Obviously, a lot of that is just kind of mop up in the second half, but defensively, he's got work to do, and he was part of the overhelping and not being in the right spot, and he still hasn't found his stroke yet. But just the photo of him in that huddle with Woodson just peering over. I don't know if this was Wednesday or Thursday, whatever game it was, but I mean, just him being the leader and kind of Woodson almost acting as a player was a little bit weird, but I just good to see that. I think at this point, you need the players to step in and say, "Hey, this is clearly not good enough. We're getting embarrassed, and we know it, and someone has to step up because." If it's not going to be Trey Galloway, who's not as much of a vocal leader, we've known this, even though he's a captain. It's got to be someone else like Goody, who has seen good basketball and knows what it's like. So good on him for that, and good for Langdon Hatton. We saw Anthony Leo for the first time. Bryson Tucker this entire week just did not look like himself. Looked like a deer in headlights. Clearly, just not the same playing at another place other than Assembly Hall, a different gym. So that was a little disappointing to see. But in this game, you can try and, keep up with the other team. You can try and, go up and down the floor, but you just can't do that for an entire half. And Indiana got gassed, and it was a 16-0 run that made the difference. It's these big runs that Indiana has allowed that just completely takes them out of these games. Indiana's beating themselves, but they did get a win in the end. For as negative as it was, yeah, you'd like to come away with a win in the last game. We wish it was the championship or even that 3-4 game against it would have been Arizona. But they do get a win against Providence. I watched zero of this game, but I know Providence is out their top scorer. But it looked like Indiana was better on all facets, passing the ball. And Baco and Renew Galloway. Galloway looked the best he was all year, which is great to see considering Miles Rice had a little bit of a down game, but still defensively things to work on. But hey, you get a win and you get a double-digit win, so at least you come out of here with something. And I guess now we're rooting for Providence to do well in the Big East this year.
Yeah, I think Providence will end up being a pretty solid team in the Big East. We talked about before this tournament what our ideal situation would be, and a lot of what we came to the conclusion of boiled down to 2 wins um, against teams that'll probably end up being solid throughout the end of the year. They got one. I have a good feeling about Providence, especially when that top scorer gets back. It's I believe Hopkins, right?
Yep.
Yeah. But there were some good things to take away from that game. They ran some good sets for Mbako on those double ball screens, get him some open looks for three. Renew played great. Galloway again stepped up after the little incident on Twitter or X or whatever you call it nowadays. He showed that, you know, he can still play. 18-5-5 for Galloway, but my biggest concern throughout this tournament, especially in the Providence game, because this was a game where Indiana was in control for most of it. But again, Miles Rice had a struggle as he did all 3 games. Let's take a look here. Rice was 1 for 8 from the field, 0 for 2 from three, 2 points on the day, and 3 rebounds. And he did have 6 assists, so that is a plus. But he's just been struggling in the scoring category. He hasn't looked too comfortable in these past few games, but again, like we've said all year, Indiana's a deep enough team that when they're playing at their best, not everybody needs to play, at least from a scoring perspective on their highest level, but it is something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, just a little bit more consistency from everybody, I think, is something we're still looking for because and I get it. This team is deeper. You don't need one person to carry the load like we've seen in past years, but Ibaka being as efficient as he was is great. He's the best shooter on this team without a doubt. He may have the highest ceiling, I guess, maybe talent wise, and obviously going to that next step maybe than anyone else. And just need to see a little bit more of him on the floor. And I think starting to figure out the rotations a little bit. I still don't like the subbing four guys in at a time and leaving someone like Carlisle on the floor. That's got to go away. But overall, a much better game. But still, this was a pretty disastrous trip, and obviously Hoosiers getting pretty humbled in games like these. But good to see them get a win in the final game and at least go out on a high note. But overall, just the guard play was not good enough. The effort was not there, and it seemed like this team honestly was checked out after that big run against they gave up to Louisville with 12 minutes left or something in that second half.
Yeah, I mean, they're in Atlantis, they're in the Bahamas, and it showed. I mean, that's another one of those problems that is carried over from year to year is the effort level, the grit, the intensity. It's just you don't see it as much as you'd like to out of these Indiana teams the past few years. And it, college basketball, this is why there are so many upsets in the non-conference and when you get to March, is because basketball isn't always about just who you have. It's about how hard you play, how fine you are in your details, and how much intensity you put into everything you do. And for the past few years, we've just seen some of these Indiana teams just get a little, lackadaisical and not put much intensity or effort into anything. They're just kind of going through the motions. And when things go wrong, there's not really a drive to fight back. There's not much of not much of a fight left when they, let up a 16-0 run to Gonzaga or fall behind by 35 to Louisville. I mean, it it comes from not just the players, but the coaching staff and the message. This is what we've seen. I keep going back to Indiana football, but it makes sense. I mean, the message in Indiana football, there's a lot of grit, there's a lot of fight. Um, it works. Um, and this Indiana basketball team in the Bahamas, you just didn't see it. There was not a lot of smiling. There was not a lot of players even having fun, it looked like. It was just you're just there playing basketball.
Yeah, it was seemed like kind of more of an obligation for the team to be there rather than an actual experience of enjoying the tournament and enjoying a special, obviously, non-conference event, which is obviously turned out to be one of the premier events during Feast Week. I think that week, Indiana, I think their ceiling maybe dropped an entire seed line for the NCAA tournament. And if the guards keep playing like this, then heck, this team's going to be closer to a bubble team than they are to being a top four seed that could compete for a Big Ten championship. And it's still too early. I get it. We said don't overreact. I've been overreacting. I feel like the way Indiana performed allows us to do that. Um, but there's still plenty of work to do. You have I think a favorable Big Ten schedule, I think to say the least. So there's chances for marquee wins, but you lost your chance at really good wins, and the computer rankings are already displaying that with Indiana dropping out of the top 25. They're 31st. They received a handful of votes, and then the net ranking, which just came out. on Monday when we're recording this. It's 71st. I think that Ken Palm has IU. I think we're like at mid late 40s or early 50s. We're in the 40 to 50 range, so it's not as bad as 71st. I had it pulled up earlier, but it's not fantastic. 53rd it is to be exact. So. Still plenty of work to do. It's early, I get it, but it's just disturbing to see the way that they've performed. And the good thing is, well, it's a much shorter turnaround from, that last game against UNCG to go into Bahamas. It's shorter on the other end is how you plays tonight when you guys are seeing this against Sam Houston State and then Miami of Ohio before you get to Minnesota and Nebraska as the first two games, which should be interesting considering Nebraska might be a tough test. That might be a game obviously Indiana lost last year in December, or maybe it was January. It was early on. It was not a pretty game whatsoever. All three games against Nebraska last year were very ugly. I guess what do we want to see in these last two games before Big Ten play starts? Starting at home against Minnesota is kind of a gift from the Big Ten, but that's kind of always happened. Just what do we want to see against Sam Houston State and Miami, Ohio?
Well, we've been saying for the non-conference that 15 plus win differential would be good. I'm going to bump that up. I'm going to say 20, 25. I mean, this is a team that's got to prove it. They got to figure out the rotations. They've got to get the guards playing better, got to shoot better. I need to see better intensity. I need to see more effort. I need to see them playing with more joy. You just don't see enough of that. Um, and these have to be pretty convincing wins. You can't have an 11-point win like it was against UNCG. Um, this is not for the purpose of boosting yourself in the computer rankings with these big wins, although it is nice to have that added on. It's for the purpose of confidence, like knowing that you can be this good of a team, however good that may be, when you're firing on all cylinders. And it's a prime opportunity to do that against Sam Houston State, against Miami, Ohio, because then you're going into the thick of your schedule for a little bit before some games over winter break with more non-conference opponents. But you got to get back on the right foot with these. You have to be convincing dominant victories on all facets. Really, anything that is lackluster will not look great against these two teams.
I said I'd do the math on every episode. I'll exclude now the three Atlantis games, but the four previous games, Indiana won by a combined 81 points, which averages out to a 21 point win. So it's got to be in the 2025 range. Sam Houston State's bad. They've lost to like Baylor by 40. They've lost to Power 5, Power 4 teams. I'm so used to saying Power 5, Power 4 teams by 20, 30, 40 points. So Indiana's favored by like 13 or something. So you got to win this game by 20. And Miami Ohio, I think, is a little bit better. But you have to keep that number at 20. And there's what, three non-conference home games left, I think. You get the two Big Ten games, and then there might be one after that. The schedule is kind of just
And
completely
Winthrop's in there somewhere.
eliminated.
Winthrop's in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, I
I'll
forgot about that.
pull up the schedule. The two Big Ten games by themselves really throw you off.
Yeah, Chattanooga. That's right. That could be the
That's
day of the college football playoff game. So you have Chattanooga and Winthrop kind of bookended on either side of Christmas before Big Ten play starts officially. So you got your four non-conference games left. Got to win them all by 20 plus points at this rate, considering that 11-point win to UNCG does not look good whatsoever, considering that's a kind of a newer team. So. Ian, any final thoughts? We're kind of back in the swing of things now that Thanksgiving is over. It's kind of for us, it's kind of a sprint until finals. And for Indiana, kind of feels like now just a drag it out kind of situation with the way the Bahamas was. But any final thoughts?
It's game seven. What now going into game eight? I will say there is a little bit more room to overreact. I think it's justified with the way they played in Atlantis, but there is still plenty of basketball left to be seen. Um, I'm not going to be completely freaking out again about anything until the Big Ten schedule hits because I want to see how they play against Big Ten teams because It's like I've been saying this whole time, this team is going to probably play a little bit better against the Big Ten. Um, but you got to get two big bounce back wins in these non-conference games and get off on the right foot with these first two Big Ten games. It's still early, there's still plenty of time left, but there are things to put a bookmark on and kind of evaluate as the start to the season goes on because they've been consistent problems not only throughout this year but throughout the past few years carrying over. So keep an eye on them and see what happens across these next few games. But um, we're starting to see a little bit more of this identity of this team. And to be honest, it's a little bit concerning, but plenty of time to make up for it.
Yeah, it's like flagging a question on an exam. You're not ready to turn it in yet. You're not ready to completely give up on it, but you do want to go back and have it just in case you want to take a second peek. I think that's something that kind of we've done, at least from these really the two big losses, just overall the trends that we saw from the Bahamas. But hey, I'm definitely the more pessimistic one of the two. Maybe it's just because I think Mike Woodson might really be the problem here, and limiting kind of IU's their ceiling and how far they can get with a talented roster like this. But there's still room for him to prove me wrong, and I'm certainly not going to give up completely quite yet, considering the Big Ten, obviously with the new teams and the new look, should obviously be better than it has been in years past, and that means obviously better wins for IU on the schedule. But for that, wrap it up here for the House of Hoosier podcast. A few weeks left until the holiday break, but we'll be back next week. I know next Monday is the opener, so maybe we'll get a preview out at some point. Maybe we'll do one afterwards. Who knows? It's the games kind of come quickly here before finals week for the students. But for Ian, I'm Austin. Obviously, follow us on our socials at House_Hoosier on Twitter, X, whatever we're calling it, and Instagram. We'll have clips up late sometime soon in the next in the coming days. But yeah, signing off here on the House Hoosier podcast.